Okay, everyone, we are in the Chevrolet Trax, and are you ready to go take this thing on a drive? Because I am, and I have been, as I just took it on a pretty long road trip, so I really got a nice feel for the Trax. Now, if you haven't seen my full review video, definitely go check that out. But for you guys, I'm going to take you on a quick tour of the exterior before we go take this Trax 2RS on a drive. Okay, guys, so this, like I said, is the Chevrolet Trax 2RS, and it's almost, or essentially is kind of like the top spec version of the Trax, so you can get the active trim, which will makes it look a little bit more off-road looking, even though there really isn't any kind of off-road prowess to it. I like this kind of fountain blue looking color. It's definitely different. There are a few other colors you can get, and we have the RS design front grille, as well as the larger 19-inch wheels you can only get on the 2RS model, and they are kind of specific to this variant. Now, I see these things literally everywhere as they're selling like crazy. There's like one over there actually in blue. It's a lower trim with the smaller wheels, but I think it does look pretty nice for an entry-level vehicle. And as you can see on my full review, there's a lot of space in here to kind of work around, to have some cargo, to put people in, and it's a really generally pretty tasteful design. My only real gripe is the rear end, is that you don't have any sort of power tailgate, which I mean I could understand at this low price point, as well as you don't really have any nice looking lights inside of the taillights. These aren't LEDs, but they look fine generally, and I think in a different color, maybe a darker color, it might be a little bit more appealing than this really loud blue shade. In the rear seats, you can see how much space you really do get back here. The tripod on the way. It's big, and you have a fully flat floor down here. Just slide across, which is really nice. It's really nice. I think these are going to be really popular cars for Ubers and taxis and stuff. You get a nice view of that front cabin, which looks really premium for a entry-level vehicle. But let's go take this thing on a drive, because that is what people really want to see and what they're going to be spending most of the time in this vehicle. Now, in here we can see we have a full digital cockpit display. So this 2RS comes with a digital instrument cluster here, as well as we have the larger display over here. The entry-level versions of the Trax do get a slightly smaller display, which is a little bit tinier. This one is really quite crisp and clear with the resolution. It looks very high quality. It's a little bit slow sometimes, and I have had some issues with Apple CarPlay disconnecting and connecting. Though it is wireless CarPlay and Android Auto, which is nice, and you have a wireless charger down here, which sometimes works. Sometimes I do have a case on. I've tried it with and without the case. It has worked on occasion. This one does have kind of lane keep assist. We also have auto stop start. You can turn it off there. Adaptive cruise with some following distance and stuff. So we'll have a look at that when we get on a highway. Let's pop it into drive and head off. We have a 6-speed automatic gearbox here, and we also have a reversing camera with trajectory. Pretty nice resolution on this reversing camera. There are no parking sensors though on the Trax. So if you are looking for that, you may want to look elsewhere. And of course, this has that very tiny 3-cylinder turbo, and it's the only engine you can get on the Trax, and it's also only front-wheel drive only, so you can't actually get an all-wheel drive option. You're gonna have to step up to a Trailblazer, which shockingly is a little bit smaller inside, though it looks a little bit more like a baby SUV. Oh, there's one right there actually. There is a Trailblazer, so that's what you're gonna want to get if you want a similar sized vehicle with a little bit less space, but if you really need that all-wheel drive. The Trailblazer can also offer you more power over this Trax, and here we're getting around 137 horsepower and just over 160 pound-feet of torque. And that torque and that turbo are really what's going to make you feel not super slow off the line or when you need to accelerate. And obviously that's because that torque is going to come lowered in the rev range. Now, as you can see here on our map for our trip computer, it doesn't get the best fuel economy on the planet. On this road trip it was 32 miles to the gallon. I got max over, this was around 420 miles. So it's okay. Someone who drove this vehicle got 42 mpg. I'm gonna assume that might be more city driving or lower speed highway driving. Just daily commuting around my town to and from work, it's been 24 mpg. So it's really hit or miss all over the place with the mpg numbers. And I was expecting a little bit more efficiency out of this powertrain. You know, it's a tiny engine. It's not a big vehicle. You have a 6-speed auto, but you know, we're just not getting that here. I wish this could have been like a sort of like a mild hybrid or some kind of hybrid system. I think that would have really been a huge hit. Something similar to like what Ford did with the Maverick hybrid 4-cylinder. That thing gets like over 40 miles to the gallon. but Chevy and GM don't really do hybrids these days. They kind of just stick to pure EVs now and just regular gas powertrains. But of course we have the E-Ray from Corvette, but that's a whole separate area. So how is the Trax to live with on a daily basis? Well, it's actually pretty nice. It's a very composed just driving experience. I wouldn't say it doesn't feel like super cheap either. The steering is light, really no feel at all, but it feels perfectly fine. I don't have any complaints with it. Obviously, we all would want a little bit more of a sharper, more direct steering feel, but for what it is, no complaints whatsoever. I also really like this steering wheel on the 2RS trim. It looks a little bit sportier than the regular Trax wheel. It has a flat bottom over here, which is kind of nice, some red stitching. And it's really nice to hold in the hand. And it is also a heated wheel as well, which is quite nice. And this engine has a really unique little grunt and sound to it, and thankfully it's not actually super loud or droney at any really speed, which is fantastic. So even if you're at highway speeds, you're really not going to be kind of like annoyed by hearing that loud engine drone, which is something typical you'll find with more naturally aspirated smaller displacement engines. But since this is turbocharged, you kind of get up to speed and it kind of just sits around 2,000 to 3,000 RPM when you're cruising on a highway. Set your adaptive cruise control, which this does have optioned, and you're kind of on your way. This also actually has a kind of adaptive sound isolation system, so it uses the speakers all around you to kind of play some low frequency sounds to cancel out some wind noise, some engine noise. Now, one thing people may be worried about is with the low power is just getting up to highway speeds and or a passing situation. Honestly, really no complaints there either. If you're someone who really needs that power or likes to have a lot of power, obviously you're going to be a little disappointed. But for the 99% of people who are buying this, they don't care about that whatsoever. They just need a daily commuter that has enough features for them to drive around to and from work, decent fuel economy, and has pretty decent amount of space. And this thing ticks all those boxes, as well as looking good inside and out. No materials are in here aren't like fantastic. The center console could be a lot softer. This is not really soft over here where you rest your arm, and the materials are all pretty much a lot of plastic, but at least they styled it well. There's some nice red accents in here. There's a lot of dynamic shapes, so it doesn't look like it's this giant slab of black plastic. They kind of put some effort into here to make it look nice, even including like this instrument cluster over here, and the infotainment display is kind of tilted towards the driver to kind of reduce glare, make it easier to touch. So they really did think about a lot of this stuff here, and I think that's why it's selling so well right now for Chevy. It's a huge hit for them. So now we are on the highway. Let's check out this adaptive cruise control system and the radar cruise. And I believe it is an option actually, so it's not standard, and it works generally okay. You can activate on the steering wheel here by pressing the cruise on button and setting your speed. It says cruise braking is on, set speed, and you can actually switch to a regular cruise mode, so it'll turn off the adaptive by holding down the button, which I don't know why you would do. I always want to have adaptive cruise control on. It's really a fantastic feature, and you can use the steering wheel to adjust your kind of gap. You do also have a little warning LED indicator that will flash on the dash actually if you're getting too close to the vehicle with your pre-selected gap, though there isn't any sort of heads-up display up there. It's just a little LED flash thing. Subaru also does something very similar to that. And like I said before, this is one of those lane keep assist systems where if you kind of go a little bit towards out of the lane, it'll kind of push you back in and beep at you, but it's not going to keep you centered all the time. So you always have to have your hands on the wheel, as you always should. But just keep in mind though, it's not one of those more advanced systems like Subaru's EyeSight or the Hyundai highway driver assist systems where you could technically take your hands off the wheel and it'll be steering itself the whole time, but obviously you're not supposed to be doing that. It's illegal. Speaking of this transmission, it might be one of my least favorite parts of this powertrain actually. The engine's actually quite okay. 99% of the time I haven't really had any issues with that. Stop start's been fine. But this transmission sometimes has been a little bit all over the place in terms of when you want to get on the power and then want to get into a lower gear. It takes some time for itself to figure out where you want to be. So that's something that you may want to consider. Take one out on a test drive to see if you like that or not. I've also had some weird issues in here with terms of the technology. So Apple CarPlay is inadvertently just shut off and the whole thing disconnected and it automatically reconnects. So I think that's just a software glitch. And I've also had some cases where I'm accelerating and the tachometer, right, since it's digital, kind of almost freezes at a certain RPM. I wish I could replicate it right now, but I've had that happen a few times. It's just a little bit laggy, if you can see right there, when I'm accelerating. So sometimes I saw it like get stuck around like 4,000, and I know I'm not stuck there, I'm moving, so something to consider as well. But generally, as a commuter vehicle, and for what it is, it's generally really, really nice. Again, if you need all-wheel drive, you're going to want to look somewhere else, as you can't get it here. But this smaller segment is really getting more competitive, and I think this new Trax is so competitive with all the features and the styling it offers, just versus some of the vehicles that were offered in the past, especially the old Chevrolet Trax, which, let's admit it here, was a little abysmal looking both inside and out, regardless of how cheap it was. And then, you know, as an RS trim vehicle, in quotes, if you're going to be getting it and thinking it's going to be anything sort of sporty, you need to do a little bit more research and stuff. It's one of those appearance package purely, and that also goes for the active trim version as well. These are both appearance packages. That one looks a little bit, you know, more rugged, and this looks a little bit more sporty inside and out, but it stops at the looks there, and that's not a bad thing. I actually quite like this as an appearance package trim. It really does enhance, I think, the feel and looks of the Trax. Going around this corner here, pretty well controlled with the body roll. It's a little bit, but it feels very confident, actually. And it's interesting, as since there are such a limited amount of features on this infotainment system, we have a dedicated traction control switch, and it's always here, right there. You can always tap it, and you have like 3 different settings for traction and stability control. So it could be fully on, both off, or just traction control off, which is really interesting. I haven't really seen that on any vehicles, but like I said, since it's such a basic infotainment system, that's what they're prioritizing here. Braking performance is also really good. Definitely gonna have to get used to this brake pedal at first. It's very touchy. Over this past week, I have gotten used to it, but when I first got into this vehicle, I was like, oh, stopping really hard. I had to get used to that. But again, that's something you're gonna get used to with every vehicle, but this one's just a little bit touchy on the brakes. But definitely never a complaint for having good and strong brakes. Anyways, everyone, thank you for joining me on this drive of the Chevrolet Trax. And over this past week, it's something that has been able to teach me of why this thing is so popular. I was really curious about that, and now I'm starting to understand it. It's got all the features, it's got the space, it's got the looks, and it's got the affordability to kind of be that mass market huge hit that I think Chevrolet needed, and they were kind of lacking once they kind of killed off all of their sedans, other than the Malibu, which is still kicking on. Anyways, guys, again, thank you for joining me on this drive, and as always, stay tuned for more coming on Allcarnews.